people. So since we're going to be doing the tanker, just briefly go over the fighter turn on for the tanker as well, since that's one of the things we're going to be doing. Although we will be refueling right after takeoff. So basically, we'll plan to do fighter takeoffs. So basically, 5-second delays between aircraft, but instead of just a slow climb up, basically once you get your wheels up, basically nose over, go to level, and bring the speed up to about 460 knots, and then it'll be a slight pull up to 60 degrees, and basically you maintain that climb up until your speed drops off to about 350 knots, and then basically roll the jet 90 degrees, start a turn, and let the jet nose fall as you're turning. Not pulling too hard because you don't want to bleed your speed too much, but just let the nose fall in the direction that you're going to be turning. And once your nose is dropped back down to around 5 degrees or so, then you want to increase your turn to your proper heading, and then roll out. And you're going to be staying in afterburner this whole time. And basically, you should come out afterburner once you're up to your cruising speed of 350 knots, or if you're number 2, 3, or 4 and you're rejoining, you don't want to maintain that afterburner to about 400 knots or so to have that overtake on lead to be able to rejoin. So that'd be the takeoff. And then the tanker's pretty close, so probably won't get into formation by the time you get to the tanker. But if you do, then this is kind of the standard setup on a tanker that's flying directly at you. Now, typically tankers do contend to turn, so it might be a little bit harder to rejoin on him when he's turning. But if you're going nose on nose with the tanker, basically it's just a baseline intercept that you're going to be flying and turning in. So basically, when you're 15 miles from the tanker, is when you want to initiate that 30-degree bank turn to close up and basically fall in behind him.
Hey, I just noticed something. The picture is not right with what our wording. Our wording says maintain 350 casts, and the picture shows 310 casts. So
yeah,
we got one of those two to freaking change. So obviously we're gonna have to maintain 310 on the cast, because the 350 doesn't seem to work as well. So let's try 310 tonight, and just remember 35 degrees offset at 15 miles is when you start your 30-degree bank turn, and just maintain 310 all the way around, and you should fall right in behind them about a mile or less.
And also, so this is the 7 degrees offset, right? 4.5 miles, 4.5 nautical miles offset.
Halfway in your turn. So when you're 90 degrees from your original point where you turn, that's where you should be at 7 degrees with 4.5 nautical miles. So that'll give you an update if you're within range.
I guess one thing we don't show on here is what your offset should be back. I guess I can't see my mouse. What's the button to see the mouse?
I see it fine.
We can see it.
Oh, okay, so basically this guy, what's your offset supposed to be from the tanker here? Should you be, 10 miles offset? No, nose on nose, 5 miles,
we don't know. We don't really have a thing, but you're shooting for at 15 nautical miles, your offset should be 35 degrees. That's what you're shooting for. So work that out somehow. And it never works out because that fucking tanker is always turning at the wrong time anyways, and it's never coming straight at you. So
yeah. So we'll give it another shot and continue to practice that. As far as tanking, like I said, the off the wing when you're waiting for fuel, there's the on deck position that you can get into, which is basically so if lead's on, number 2 wants to be basically right off of his wing, and you'll get cleared to contact as soon as the jet in front of you has come off. And then 3 and 4 would be off the wing, off the left side of the wing as they're waiting for fuel. Then just cycle over to the right hand side as you get the fuel.
Gonna make a note.
Yeah.
For that on the on deck position, like you see right there, that Zeke's showing there. Don't be like right up on that jet when you get in on deck position, because obviously the tanker isn't realistic. It might move and do some drastic things. So you're going to be in on deck position, make sure you have decent offset or just stay on the wing.
Here's one thing I do think we might want to change actually is don't go into your on deck position. Let's do it tonight and tell the guy is actually on the boom. Once he is actually receiving fuel, then you're cleared for on deck. If he hasn't got it, if he's not getting fuel, do not go to on deck because he may be moving all over the place and making it much more difficult. So don't go to on deck until he's getting fuel.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I'd recommend like about a ship's length between you and the guy on the boom too, for safety and because of the tanker jumping.
Yeah, and then this is basically after everybody's refueled, then everybody's on the right-hand side. Now, flight lead may, once number 4 is off, that if the tanker's in a turn, the flight may continue to fly in the direction that they're heading. So, just be ready for that call that, you may break off of the tanker before everybody's actually set up on the right-hand side, depending on, what position they're pointing and whatnot. All right, let me get into the Tacform. So basically, we've got the spread. So basically, it's about a mile spread with 1,000-foot altitude separation with the number 2. And basically, that just allows for number 2 to, if he sucked, he can put the nose over, gain some speed. It also allows for better visibility, so that way you're not looking, directly at this side of the aircraft, which is a very low profile. Whereas if you're looking, with the 20 degrees or so, then you've got a better chance of seeing the other jet. So like I say, the spread is just 1 mile line abreast, essentially. And you're in the proper position. You can use a TACAN, you can use the HSD, and just try to maintain that position. It's up to number 2 to maintain the position. Just keep that in mind.
Do yourself a favor once you're in a 1 mile spread and in proper position, get yourself visual and recognize that, because this is mostly should be flown visually and not instruments. So make sure you recognize your visual, distance and position.
And like I said, it's up to number 2 to maintain position, but it's also up to number 1 to fly, the briefed speed or whatever was called out for the speed and also the heading, and not to change or deviate from that without, making a call. So just keep that in mind for the leads. The other thing on Tacform that we talk about when we're going over it is also the scan assignments. Let me see if I can find the document and I can pull it up real quick.
I can just tell you what it is if you want.
Yeah, if you want to go and say it while I'm trying to find the document.
All right. First thing is near rocks, which is basically anything that's immediately in front of you. Then far rocks, which is something that's further out that's going to be in front of you at some point soon. And then you're going to check your wingman's other side, 6 o'clock, just behind him and on the other side of him. Then you're going to check your opposite side. So basically look behind you where he's not. And then you're going to, in the middle of that, you're going to look at your radar sensors. So we'll just keep it simple like that.
Keep talking, I'm still looking.
That's it. Just said it. So when I say scanning instruments, so basically, before you check your other side, you're going to look at your instruments, and then last but not least, you'll check the other side away from them. So near rocks, far rocks, your wingman's 6 opposite side, and then your opposite side, and then your instruments, basically your radar and all that good stuff, your RWR.
I thought you check your wingman's nose after your wingman's 6.
No, you're just checking behind him. He's got his scan of his own nose, so you don't have to check his nose.
Still looking.
That was a pretty good description.
Yeah, I just want to pull up the images. I'll know in a second if I can find it or not.
And don't forget to do it, because for the most part, I bet you most of us always forget to do it because we're concentrating on our own shit. So just practice it. It's it's just part of just like doing your steep turns. It's the same thing. Your scan assignments, same way.
Yeah, and if you don't do it perfect, I mean, at least you tried to do it. Maybe next time you get a little bit more and a little bit more, something to build upon.
You can save your butt if a jet comes up, like MiG-29s come up sometimes, like with heaters, and they just come out of the clouds like there's an overcast, and then they can be following for a while because they're too far away, but you can still see them. But if no one's looking, then you ain't gonna see it.
Yeah. All right, so now we're going to get into the actual Tacform. Sorry, Glax is saying something. Let me read what you got.
You just said at night you'll want to be higher than the lead, so you can see better with the night vision goggles, and then opposite for the daytime.
It's all about contrast because you're always like if you're looking at the night sky under NVGs and Falcon, you can't see shit. You can't see each other's jets. But if you come up about 500,000 feet, you'll be able to pick out the jet in the contrast between the ground because it's all monochrome, so it's a lot easier.
Yep. All right. So now we're we're flying that spread, 1 mile spread, and we're going to be turning the aircraft. We want to turn the flight. We're a two-ship. Basically, we have the check turn that we can do. Basically, it can be done from anywhere from 0 to 30 degrees. And how about I'll have myself and Jambo do an example of a check turn. So basically, if we're flying, say 360, call signs Cowboy 1. There's going to be Cowboy 1 2. Check right 030.
Oh, Cowboy 12300. Gotta press the button.
030.
Cowboy 12. See, that's why you repeat it. Cowboy 12030.
Yeah, and then basically once the number 2 aircraft has made his call, that's when lead initiates that turn. So for a check turn, as you can see on the image here, we got number 1 on the left, number 2 on the right. Basically, the outside jet will go mill power essentially, and try to get a little bit extra speed because he's going to be on the outside of the turn, and he's going to turn basically an energy sustaining turn to the heading that was called out. So in this case, 030. Number 2 is going to not necessarily go mill power, but it's just going to be an energy sustaining turn. But it's going to turn an extra 30 degrees and then back to the original heading that's called. So basically, it's going to turn to 060 and flow 060 for 3 to 5 seconds, and then turn back to 030. And that's basically to cause him to have to fly a little bit farther since he's on the inside to allow the outside jet, in this case number 2, or number 1, to kind of catch up and get back into position.
I have a question real quick. So are we going to set standard to say the degrees when we do the check turn, or just saying to? I know we were going back and forth.
Always,
not saying
always say where you're turning to when it's a check turn. You always say the degrees when you're doing a check turn. Hopefully that makes sense. Always.
Yeah, the one that you think about is the tack turn, where if it's exactly 90, you don't have to call it out, but I always call it out.
One thing about your check turns, it's not in the procedures here, but the guy that's turning, the one that's turning out the additional 30 degrees and holding it, he's most likely should turn in an additional 10 to 20 degrees for a couple seconds after, and then come back to the heading call, because otherwise he's going to be about 2 miles spread. So just put that in mind. Anyways, continue.
Yeah, so just remember that inside jet to turn the extra 30 degrees. That's the biggest mistake that everybody that I see that I fly this with makes. They just turn to the heading, and that's it. But if you're in spread and you're doing Tacform and you're doing a check turn and you're the inside jet, turn that extra 30 degrees for the extra 3 to 5 seconds. I say 3 to 5 seconds because if it's not a 30-degree turn, and say it's a 10-degree turn, then you don't have to hold it as long. Because a check turn can be anything up to 30 degrees.
As a note, if it's only at 10 degrees, you won't have to turn an additional anything because it'll be just perfect.
All right, next one is a tactical turn. Basically, this is for turning, the formation 90 degrees, and it can be anywhere from, what is it, 45 to 90? Is that right?
135. 45 to 135.
And so yeah, basically it's similar brevity. So how about Quacks and Goat? Go ahead and do a typical tactical turn. You're flying 360, and you're going to be turning in the direction of your choice.
So Stingray 5-1, tack left.
2 tack left.
Yep. So basically,
Could say
because
the
it
heading,
was
but with an easy
well,
heading,
because it was exactly 90, you don't have to say the heading. But like I always say the heading, just because it kind of makes it a little bit more clear on where we're going. Because as number 2, if you're doing all your scan assignments, you don't always know. I find the heading that we're necessarily flying. So then if lead calls out to do attack, then it does add extra time to get situated on seeing what the exact heading is, doing the math to see what the 90
No
degrees of
math.
that is. Well, looking at your HSI and
Calculators.
seeing what the heading is supposed to be and turning to it.
Yeah, with that said, HSI is your friend. If it's attack left, look down at the 9 o'clock position. That is your turn, your heading that you're going to turn. So look down it, say it to yourself, out loud to yourself, not over the radio, but say it to yourself. After you call the tack left, you start turning, say it to yourself. Keep repeating it, because that way you don't forget when you're going to roll out. Because I find myself, I'll look down, I'll look up, start performing the maneuver, and then I'll go, oh shit, what was it? But if you say it out loud to yourself, it's most likely you won't forget.
Or if Lee just always says it, then you're just gonna repeat it, and then you're gonna know where you're going.
Another thing to remember, if you have a jet with Jehemix on it, you can look in the direction, pick out that heading, and then you can use a visual reference point as well. It's like pick something out there that's in that direction, and then you can use, rather than having to try and staring at your heading bug, you can keep your head out the aircraft and be scanning your area while you're doing the turn.
Great idea.
Yep. So then, so the check turn we talked about, the inside jet basically turns the extra 30 degrees for 3 to 5 seconds on attack turn, and also for the check turn, both aircraft begin the turn at the same time. For a tactical turn, the outside jet will always begin the turn first, turning in the direction being that you're going to be flying. So basically, as you can see in the image here, we got number 1 and number 2. I'm looking at the left image. Number one's on the left side. Number 2's on the right side. So number 2 initiates his turn to the left first. Once 1 sees number 2 flying basically at him, that's when he initiates his turn. So he delays until number 2 is essentially, coming around pointing at him. And then he does his turn.
One quick note. Before you actually make your turn, as you're the first guy, put your throttle to mill power and then do it. And then maintain the preset speed. So whatever speed you're flying at, or whatever speed was determined by the lead as your preset speed.
And same with that number 2 jet as well, the one initiating the turn. Once you're about to do that turn, it's an energy sustaining turn that you want to go mill power and maintain that speed that you're flying, which would typically for tonight, our typical standard flying speed is about 350 knots.
Yeah, so if you're number 1 here on the tack left, you're not, as soon as 2 says Stingray 5-2, number 1's not going to go mill power until he's about to turn. So just stay at 350 knots. Or whatever the speed is. Stay at that speed until you're about to make your turn. Then go mill, and then start pulling for the speed. And then get your head out of the goddamn jet soon and look for that guy. That's the most important thing, is get your visual references and see where you're at. Like Quack said, get your head out of the jet and find a reference point to look for.
And remember, pointing your nose down also gives you a benefit, because you get that you're not maintaining your altitude isn't that super duper important all the time. So getting your nose down will give you more energy to play with, so you're not pulling as hard, and you can get around the turn a little bit tighter.
And if you're Cat 3, it'll be pretty slow. But if you're like really light Cat 1, these tack turns will be really fast.
Yep.
And we're going to be Cat
And-
3 tonight.
Yes.
Question.
Well, never mind.
So the order shall be meal, bank, pool.
Yep.
Perfect.
Maintain your speed. Don't go
Yep.
don't go slower, don't go faster.
Yeah, Tacform is energy sustaining turns. Just remember that.
Except a cross turn.
All right, so we talked about doing turns 0 to 30. That's a check turn. Talked about turns 45 to 130
35.
ish, 135.
135.
I could do
I think that would
if I
look
could do my
weird.
math. Now we got basically if we need to go the 180 degrees plus or minus 30 degrees is going to be a hook turn. So similar terminology. Goat and actually goat already did one. Who we got?
Howler and Leo. There you go.
All right, so Howler and Leo, go ahead and do the brevity for a hook turn. Once again, you're flying 360. One's on the left, two's on the right, and Leo, your lead.
Yay, Cowboy 1-2, hook left.
2, hook left.
Now,
All right, so basically, once two makes that hook left call, that's when the turn's initiated. And again, it's a energy sustaining turn, and basically both aircraft are going to be turning in the same direction. But you can see that when you turn, when you're flying initially, one's on the left, two's on the right. But when you end up after the turn, you've now switched sides. Two's on the left and one's on the right.
or just
in
for,
a,
I think
in a
the-
go
hook
back.
turn.
Yeah, Howler, you don't say hook left. You just say 2, or you just say your call sign, Cowboy 1-2, and that initiates the turn.
Gotcha.
And you don't do it on tack. So you don't call the actual turn. The only thing you do, other than say Cowboy 1-2, is if it's a check turn, you're going to say Cowboy 1-2 is 030 or whatever the heading he stated. Or if he hooks and it's not 180 degrees, so if he says hook left 180, or sorry, hook left 190, then you're going to say then you're going to say Cowboy 1-2 190.
Got it.
And again, these are energy sustaining turns as well. Same thing. Basically, once T comes back, it's best to go mill power and initiate the turn, maintaining your speed.
One quick thing is when we're doing this stuff for practice, we like to see everybody use their full call sign. When you're out flying campaigns and you're in a combat situation, it's okay not to say the full call sign because you're just trying to clear out the channel. But for tonight and anytime we do this practices, use your full call sign.
Any questions on the hook?
Oh, one comment on the hook. If you're the guy, like in this one on the hook left, if you're the number 2, when you're halfway through your turn, make sure you have your head out looking forward, and you should see exactly the tailpipe of number 1. If you see number 1 has turned more than you, then you need to get yourself more speed by putting your nose down lower and getting your nose around quicker. If you see him the opposite, then you've basically made yourself turn a little too quick and then just ease off the turn somehow.
And also, as number 1, not always, but sometimes you'll pick up number 2's radar when you're halfway through your turn, as he's putting his radar on you during his turn, as he's pointing at you halfway through as well.
Just some bad habit is like some people will just fly the number. Like they'll just look at the HUD kind of and do it, but just like always be looking at the lead and use the. If you have the helmet mounted queuing system, use that to look at the G's and the speed.
Yeah,
Yep.
this was designed for visuals, so you want to be positioned visually.
But here's the thing. What I found out in IFT is that in order since I'm not as familiar as others, I had to keep my head down and just to keep the speed. And I maintain exact speed, while the veterans tend to be head out and not keep the speed too much, and then there's a difference by the end of the turn.
But yes, that's true if you're flying the numbers. But we're not trying to fly the numbers today. We're trying to fly a visual formation. So as the -2, it's your job to adjust off of lead. If he slows down, then you should try and stay as best you can in his position and be like, and just give him a quick reminder like 2 check speed or like 1 check speed or something like that. Like if you're going too slow, if he feels like he's going too slow. But
Yeah,
your
lead
job
should
is
be
to
flying the
maintain
numbers
position.
tonight. Yeah, so lead, do your best to fly the numbers because that's the only way it's going to be practiced perfectly.
All right, any other questions on the hook? All right, next one's the shackle. And basically, it's just to have the two aircraft switch sides. So as you can see, you got 1 and 2. One's on the left, two's on the right. And a shackle basically just causes them to switch to have 1 on the right, 2 on the left. Basically, it's the same thing, but it can be done to change the heading as well, up to 30 degrees. But normally it's just to switch the sides. So in this case, it's just cowboy shackle, and then cowboy shackle with the actual heading that you're going to go is the other way to call it out. To execute it, it's basically if you are in position, so if you are spread and you are lined up properly, then each aircraft turns 45 degrees. Once they cross, essentially, then you begin rolling back out to the heading called. But the shackle can also be used to get guys back into position. So let's say number 2 is acute, so out in front. Basically, then you can the aircraft out in front would be the one that does more of the maneuvering to get them back into position. So let's say 2's half a mile out in front or something. Not half a mile, it's kind of too big, but let's say 0.3 miles out in front or something like that. You call a shackle. 2 would then do more of the maneuvering across the path of number 1. 1 may do a slight offset, but not as much. That would allow essentially number 1 to catch up to number 2 and get back into position. So like I say, in the shackle, if you're out of position, the lead aircraft is one that does more, that holds that that 45 degrees longer.
You can
Something I
also
do
fix it
on the
with
shackle. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
But you can also fix it if you're out of if number if the guy on the right's too far ahead and the guy on the left is far behind, you can do a check left to get into perfect spread, however many degrees you want, and then do a attack left or right or whatever, or maybe a check turn after that just to fix it.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
let's say you want to fly north here, and you're flying north currently. You don't want to make a maneuver to the left and then you're behind schedule. So this is basically allows you to stay on schedule and on speed, the same direction.
Something I do with shackles, if I'm like the acute jet, say, is I'll kind of treat it like a delayed turn, like a tack turn. I'll wait till my lead is like almost pointing at me, and then I'll initiate my turn and then fly out. So that way he gets a chance to get further along the turn before I initiate my turn, and then catch up with him when I'm paired up with him.
Just remember, if the lead calls shackle and it's because you're out of position, he's gonna maneuver himself properly, but you have to be the one that does the maneuvering the most. So if you're out front, you're gonna have to pull hard into them. Just fly over top of them, and then once you fly over top and count 1 potato, 2 potato, and then turn to the called heading. If you fly right over top of them and you wait 2 seconds and then turn to the heading, you should be fine with speed if you didn't bleed all your speed out.
All right, so then we'll get into the cross turns, which are a little bit different than the rest. I mean, basically, this is a similar result as a hook turn in the fact that you are changing your heading 180 degrees, with the difference of instead of both aircraft turning the same direction, both aircraft are going to be turning into each other, and also they're going to be flying. It's a max G turn as well. So you're going to be pulling as much G's as you can. It's more of a defensive type of break that you're going to be taking to basically get the flight flow in the opposite direction. So like I say, it's mill power and basically trying to have the tightest turn radius as you can. And it says that you're supposed to roll. If you do that, you're going to roll out on the same heading or the same distance apart. But obviously that depends on aircraft weight and whatnot. So typically we end up being farther apart than 1 mile. So you typically do need to fly back towards each other and then roll out on the original heading.
It's not a mill power turn; it's an afterburner turn. If you want to get around as quick as possible.
Yeah, sorry, I thought I said afterburner, but maybe I said no.
So
And
is it a slice where you're losing altitude then?
So
yes.
when you call it, you're gonna call 1 high, 2 low, or whichever way, whatever one wants to do. He's gonna call what he's gonna do. So that way, either you're gonna slice back or you're gonna pitch back, basically. So like one would call like cowboy cross turn 1 high, and then 2, and you'll just call back 2, and you're gonna slice versus a pitch back.
Yeah, it's always going to be with nose down, but the 1 high, 2 low is to basically reference, so you know who's going over top of who. So, and tonight 2 is always going to be up 1,000 feet, so it's going to be cowboy 1 cross or cowboy 1 cross turn 1 low, and then 2 should say cowboy 1 2 high. That's just confirming that you both know what altitudes who's going to be over top of who.
You just got to remember you're putting in an afterburner and you're turning around as quickly as possible. So you got to make sure. I think that can be a very dangerous point for a potential midair.
And this turns meant basically it's a defensive maneuver to basically turn the hell around as quickly as possible to get away from danger. Is basically bottom line is what it's for.
All right, so that's basically the 2 ship formations with the tactical form. With, like I say, the chuck turn, the tack turn, the hook turn, the shackle, and the cross turn.
Well, one thing we just need to talk about real quick is
You're kind of quiet.
Since we're going to have a 4-ship flight and we're going to separate it into 2 elements. Sorry, normally we would just say cowboy, check left. Since cowboy, the 2 elements are going to be on the same Victor channel, we don't really have I don't know what the brevity is for it to be called for the element and the secondary element. So maybe you could just say for the first element, cowboy 2, check left, and then the other one would be cowboy 4 or something. I guess I don't know. Anybody else?
As a lead, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna basically tell I'm with like 2, 3, or 4, whoever's on my wing, like 2, check left, and then he knows who I'm talking to, and then he should be off of me, and then 3 should do the same thing for 4 because it makes the most sense.
Yeah, that's what I do.
Yeah, normally you could hear the voicing difference, but I think that's a good idea for tonight.
All right, so that's we'll get into the that part a little bit later. I just want to go over the wedge as well, and then also the fluid floor. So here's a picture of the wedge. Basically, it's about a mile off of the lead's wing in that between 30 and 60 degrees. And basically, it's a visual formation. You're kind of following lead, and the aircraft in front of you, and you clear the switch left and right side as needed, except for when you're in the actual fluid floor, in which case you're going to want to try to stay on the outside. But yeah, I mean, basically that's kind of the positioning that you want to have.
Question.
Yep.
Quite a few times I've been asked to fly wedge, and then when I go wedge, I've been asked to go a bit forward because I'm not being seen by my lead. So I don't get it.
So it potentially, it's hard to say, knowing for sure, without looking at the tapes and seeing where you were, but either you were too far behind, you were, past the 60 degrees, maybe you're at 70, 80, if lead's not able to see you, then, that would indicate that you are too far behind, because he should be able to see you if you are, between that 60 and 30 degrees without any problem.
So you want to have the wingtip of the missile tip rail lined up with a pilot helmet just further out.
Ideally, you're at that 45 degrees like you see in this picture, but if it's me, usually it's like I can see you like at my tail. Like I can, like if I have to look over my elevon there, then I'm like, okay, you're too far back. You're back here in like you're back here in like that 70, 80 degree range. So as long as you're within this scope, all I want to be able to do is just look over my wing, see you, look back. But if I have to look over my wing and then look behind my chair, that's when it becomes an issue.
Put it this way: when a wingman and the lead fly a lot together, and he trusts them, he doesn't ever have to look back there and to make sure you're there because he knows you're going to be there. So it's just a matter of getting comfortable with each other. But there's one difference between a wedge and a fighting wing, and I just want to point it out. The fighting wing allows for lateral separation as well, so you can have altitude difference as well, which allows a lot more flexibility as well. So if you're in a wedge, normally you're at the same altitude, and so sometimes it's not as easy to make missile shots or whatever, because you don't want to shoot a missile at the same altitude if you're the number two. Shooting a missile out in front of you, even though you're just a little bit outside, it's still not a great idea. So just remember, fighting wing might be more advantageous for an air-to-air situation.
But the fighting wing is a little bit closer as well. It's not at the same distance. It's a little closer in as well.
Right.
All right, so that's the wedge essentially that we'll be flying as well as a two ship, and then on the last part, it'd be good to get everybody in as a four ship and fly the fluid four. So basically, this formation here, basically having, I like to have, I think it has a little bit farther than basically 1.5 miles. I like to have it at about a mile, and that way that the lead and element lead can essentially fly normal Tacform, normal spread, with 2 and 4 in the wedge position. Is kind of how I like to do it. And, it's not, this is more of the fighting wing. It's saying, 500 to 3,000 for the number 2 and number 4. I like to put them in the wedge and have 1 and 3 basically a mile spread, so that way that we can maintain that normal tack form between 1 and 3. And when we're doing, I call it fluid 4, though it's slightly modified, but when we're doing that tack form between 1 and 3, so, we'll say 1 and 3 are flying, 360, and we're going to do a check turn, and say it's coming to 030, lead make that call out, 3 check right 030, then it's only number 3 that responds to that tack form call. 2 and 4, because they're in that wedge position, don't respond. They simply just continue to fly the wedge position. Similar to, as a two ship, when we're flying, the two ship wedge, there isn't going to be any call outs to changing headings or speed or altitude or anything. Basically, it's number 2 flying in the wedge position and maintaining that position visually without any radio calls from 1 telling him, hey, I'm going to start descending, or I'm going to start turning this way or that way. It's just strictly all visual, no radio communications, which is why I like the Fluid 4, and also as a 4 ship, if we ever detach, flying in the wedge, because it really cuts down on the radio communications on the local channel.
The only concern I have on the Fluid 4 is doing tack turns, is that you're at the same elevation or altitude, and it could be a problem. So just be careful.
Well, would still want to have that 1,000-foot separation for the element and lead element. What else? And also in the Fluid 4, you'd want to, 2 and 4 should be on the outside of the formation as well.
So essentially, the elements, it's like there's when you do the tack turns, number 3 and number 2 and 4 don't do anything, just stay where they should before and after.
That's correct. In this case, let's say they did a tack right. Let's say they're flying 360, it's tack right 090. They're going to be ending up on opposite sides. So 2 would then switch over to be on the wedge on the right hand side now of 1, since 1 would end up being on the right hand side of the formation with number 3 on the left hand side, and same with number 4. He would end up switching over to the left hand side of number 3. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Hi. So any questions on that? We're getting up to 50 minutes in. I'd like to get this rolling. So I'll go ahead and put up the TE.
Me and Haller made a video. It turns out what we came up with is pretty similar to the real life, I guess, nonverbal tack form. Just replace radio calls with a 90 or 80 or 90 degree, like, really quick ring rock, look for the acknowledgement, and then do it. And for hook turns, it's 2.
Yeah, if you
Yeah, I
guys
saw
can fly
your-
a proper verbal one, then we can work on the non-verbals.
That's right.
Because I see a lot of people doing it incorrectly. They most of the time they're losing all their speed, and that's where most people get it wrong. Is they believe every speed that they had. So remember, this is maintaining speed.
Oh yeah, and I read a thing from the real thing. Like, so if you start at 350, but then you accidentally go to like 330 or something, like just hold it there. Or, like try what you can, maybe go up to 335, but don't try and go all the way up to 350. Like fix it after the turn. That's what I read.
Yeah,
Yeah,
one
maybe
quick.
we'll get into that eventually once we, get a good solid basics going for everybody.
Got one quick question on the cockpit reference for the 3.9 line. Do you guys have a cockpit reference you use?
Edge of the seat, or the HMCS. I just use HMCS, and then look down at the seat and make sure that's like the side of the seat is like 90 degrees.
You should be left and right. I don't know what else to say. You shouldn't be too far forward, too far acute. I mean, and too far stuck. So.
On the left side, you look. It's just before the throttle. There's a seam between the panels. On the right side, it's about the same. It should be at about your right elbow, right and left elbow. So it's in. Just look at the leftmost panel and the seam to the next one, and the same for the right.
There's
Sounds good.
There's a picture somewhere. There's a diagram showing the cockpit with the 30 degrees and all that cues on it somewhere.
Yeah, it's called like multiplayer formations or something.
The issue is it seems in the cockpit like it's too back, but it's actually depicted right.
All right, servers up.
Are we doing taxis?
Say
Or
that
is
again.
Are we gonna taxi or ramp? Because like
No,
otherwise
we're
I
gonna
gotta
do a
grab all my
taxi
stuff.
since we're gonna do a taxi since it's getting late already.
Okay.